David Cronenberg and Paul Haggis made two films with the same title, yeah. One had sex and fishes, while the other is about racism, I guess. Maybe you like James Spader, or for the likes of Brendan Fraser. What does everyone think of these movies? You'll have to listen and just wait and see. They're both called Crash. Yes, indeed, dear. On the Movie Club Podcast. Yeah, Crash. Movies, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Movie Club Podcast. This is the show in which a rotating group of movie bloggers, fans, aficionados, we just pick a couple films, somewhat arbitrarily, I guess, and discuss them at length. This is episode 24. For this episode, we'll be discussing David Cronenberg's Crash, as well as Paul Haggis's Crash. This show is very much like a book club, so obviously there's spoilers. It'd probably behoove you to probably have seen both of the films we're discussing before listening to the show. So definitely check out those films before you get in. We can be found at movieclubpodcast.com, and you can check the show notes there for time tracks and skip ahead to the next review if you're so inclined. So I guess we will just kind of go around the table here, the virtual room, and introduce ourselves. I am Andrew James from row3.com.
And I am Jim Laskowski from directorsclubpodcast.com.
And I am Kurt from row3.com and Twitch Film.
And I'm Ryan McNeil from thematinee.ca and the Matinee Cast.
And there you have it. I think we decided first that... so I mentioned we're going to do Cronenberg's Crash and Paul Haggis's Crash. Thought we'd start out right away with 1996, David Cronenberg's Crash. No, we had decided this one on the last show. Do you guys remember? Oh, I guess it was me. I had put forth a list of movies, and Sean said, I like the idea of doing a Crash episode. So I guess the catalyst for choosing David Cronenberg's Crash, no particular reason. I just have the DVD, the Canadian DVD, actually. Thank you to Ashley, by the way, if you're listening, for giving me the DVD 2 years ago in Toronto, and I just got around to watching it. So it's just been sitting on my coffee table forever. I'm severely lacking in my Cronenberg knowledge, so I put it forth, and Sean said, let's do it.
Now, is it literally sitting on your coffee table, and what does the cover look like?
It's kind of a... I don't have it right in front of me. I actually brought it to work today. But it's kind of dark blue and black. I think James Spader's face is on there, and Kara Unger's face. Like, it's just kind of a weird, really dark drawing of the two of them. When I popped in the DVD, and this is something we can bring up, I think, during the show. When I popped in the DVD, it gave me the option of the NC-17 or the R-rated version. So I don't know if that matters or not, but...
I remember Blockbuster had put out only the R-rated version.
Well, they never carried NC-17 films.
Right, true. I just remember the video cover art was completely different.
Yeah, when I searched for posters or DVD covers, there was several different choices as well. So, well, I guess what we can do here is just, again, go around the table and maybe just first impressions of the film. Was this the first time you saw it, whatever? Like I said... for me, this was a first-time watch. I just had it for a long time. I've always kind of been interested. I saw a clip on cable, I think, maybe 10 years ago or something, of the scene where James Spader is driving and the other two are getting it on in the back seat. And I remember just going, oh, this is weird, and then, but I don't want to watch a movie right in the middle, so I turned it off. And that's all I really knew about the film, other than the synopsis, which is essentially, I suppose I'll give that to, it's a story about people that get off sexually on car crashes and car accidents. And that's essentially what it's about. So I guess we'll just go around the table, and what were your first impressions, Jim?
Well, I'm a huge fan of David Cronenberg. He's probably in my top 10. No, he definitely is in my top 10 favorite directors. And I remember reading Ebert's review of Crash at the time when it first came out, and it got me really excited, and saw it in the theater, which was a kind of a surreal experience. I mean, I remember it was not I think it was around the same time I had seen David Lynch's Lost Highway with the same group of friends, and we had a very interesting discussion about that film because we all had varying opinions on it. So we were all kind of just pumped to see, Cronenberg's take on a J.G. Ballard novel. And I just remember there being, quite a few walkouts, as you would expect from a lot of people who felt uncomfortable. And then there were those couple of lone guys there who were just a little creepy in the theater. But, obviously they didn't do anything, that was that disturbing. But, me and my friends did not have the best reaction to the film at the time when we first saw it. And even recently when we did an episode on David Cronenberg for Directors Club, pretty much the general consensus amongst all three of us was that Crash is one of the few Cronenberg films we actively kind of dislike. So I've tried watching it at least 3 times now, and each time I'm just kind of perplexed by it a little bit. We'll get more into the general opinions about it, but my opinion over the 3 viewings has not changed much. So,
all right, and Kurt?
I didn't see this in the theater. I don't know why, because I was a David Cronenberg fan. I don't know if it even played where I lived, and I don't know if I live just outside of Toronto on the east side of, like, just within the sort of city limits, but in a different town, like a suburb, and I really don't think the film played there, and I don't even know whether they distributed as an NC-17 or like what version, because there's multiple versions. But I do remember waiting for it to come out on VHS and finally watching it at home, like a good pornography film should be watched in post 1980. But my first experience to this movie was just absolute bafflement. I had trouble with the way the movie was paced. I didn't even find it sexy. It's very obviously a Cronenberg movie, but I had a very negative, disappointing reaction because I guess I had worked, because it was so long before I finally got a chance to see it, that I kind of worked up what the movie was in my mind, and the movie that I saw was not that at all. But over the years, I've probably seen it maybe 6 or 7 times, and it's not my favorite Cronenberg film, but it's definitely in the upper tier, and I've learned to really love this movie, and I sort of got past my initial reaction.
Interesting.
Mr. McNeil.
I actually just watched this for the first time tonight, thanks to Mr. Halfyard, because strangely, I hadn't seen it, even though we covered Cronenberg on my homage to Jim's podcast, the Film Locker, with my friend Simon in London. We did an episode on Cronenberg back this summer, and this was one that I couldn't track down at the time. So I watched it just mere hours ago. And it was also, just kind of a side tangent, it was actually also the first film I watched on Netflix on my iPhone. So that was kind of strange, because I'm watching Crash, and every once in a while my wife is kind of bobbing back and forth in my eye line, like in the next room. So it's a little unnerving to kind of be watching a movie like that way. And she just kind of timed it just so. which was neither here nor there. But anyway, yeah. So I watched this one today. I really liked it actually, which I didn't really expect. I think just because of the order that I've seen Cronenberg's films in, this one I guess I watched it in the right placement in the scheme of things, in the right mindset of my film literacy, and I enjoyed it for watching a movie on my phone.
Awesome. I watch movies on my phone all the time. I guess I want to start off asking. I mentioned on my DVD, it asks right away, NC-17 or R-rated version. I just picked NC-17. I figured there's going to be more there. It might be, I don't know how much more. I don't know if it's more raunchy. Oh, it is 10 minutes.
10 minutes, and I assume that there's about 10 minutes of pubic hair in this film, and I just would imagine that's the actual dividing line of what women's pubic hair pretty much makes a movie NC-17.
Okay. Well, almost immediately, I don't even know why, I realized I wish I'd chose the R version. I'm kind of on the side of Jim here. I didn't hate the movie at all. I don't actively dislike it. I just had a real hard time getting into it. I also found the pacing strangely odd. I don't like the way the characters speak to each other. The style of all the acting, which is clearly a director's like a director choice or control, exactly. So, no, I wasn't really a big fan of that. Now, I guess I can see Kurt's angle that maybe like it's an acquired taste. It would take a few viewings, but I'm not sure I could bother with watching it too many more times in a row.
Well, I don't believe the sex scenes are ever designed to be sexy. I don't think that. I think the sex scenes are interesting, but they're not erotic. I don't know. I've not. We talked about this before the show started. That there is a David Cronenberg commentary for the film, but it's only available on the Laserdisc version, or maybe it's on some other DVD. It's certainly. I had watched the same DVD that you have, Andrew, where it asks you at the beginning. It's a fairly old DVD edition of the film, but I think that the scenes are purposely not supposed to be sexy because the characters are not actually. They're trying to get off, but at no point ever in the movie is it enough. I think that's kind of the point of the movie, is that it's just they're not quite there. They're trying to find this high, this ultimate sexual experience, and they're not finding it. And somehow I think it's kind of an interesting act by the director to make sure that you're this sort of voyeur watching, but it's not terribly. I don't feel exceptionally turned on watching this movie. I feel uncomfortable.
Right, and I did too. I think that's part of the point. You're right, it's not erotic. It's very... I think the word I used when I was watching it last night was it's greasy. It's skanky, kind of, in just an uncomfortable way. I'm not turned on at all by it. I think part of that might be... You didn't watch
this one on the bus, did you?
No, not this one. I think part of that might be just the actors that he got to play it. I mean, it's nobody really exceptionally good looking, at least in my opinion. And I've always thought, especially around this time, that James Spader was just kind of a sleazy, creepy guy. And he's obviously pretty much the main character of this film, and it holds true with Crash. He's just, I don't really want to touch him with a 10-foot pole, and I think that's a big part of it.
I think he automatically ups the creep factor on any film by a factor of 5. Like, I think of him in something like Secretary.
Mm.
Right. Or Sex Lies and Videotape, or 2 Days in the Valley. Just anything
Stargate.
Yeah, anything pre-95 pretty much. He was just
that was his thing.
Creepy, weird guy.
But Deborah Kara Unger is, I think, a very exotic-looking woman. She often appears in horror films. or really strange noir. Like, she's like a very interesting femme fatale kind of look to her, and I really like her in the film. And she's kind of the last one to join the club. She's kind of off to the side, but she gets that absolutely fantastic intro where the camera, it's in like an airplane hangar, and it's all these pristine, polished airplanes, and the camera is on a crane, and it kind of dekes through all these slick, polished planes to come up with her leaning over and sort of hugging the front of the fuselage, or the cockpit, I guess is probably the right phrase, as she's being serviced orally by some character that never comes back into the film, as she's sort of cheating on. Well, it's not really cheating. They seem to have this relationship where they both go off and have sexual encounters, bring them back to their own bed, and see if that helps them. So, right off the bat, that these two characters are not sexually satisfied in any way. Their sex is very, it's very soft and kind of boring. Like they're bored people, don't you think?
Yeah, I still laugh at one of the prolonged scenes they have together in bed where she's using clinical terms like penis and anus. It's just like, do you want to put your penis inside of his anus and ejaculate? I don't know. I find it ridiculous. I mean, I've actually read the book. I remember reading it after I saw the movie to sort of get, because I was, as much as I didn't like the movie or the experience of watching the movie, I thought the ideas were really interesting. So I wanted to see how they translated to text. And I know that J.G. Ballard is a beloved writer, and people, put him in, very high regard. And I've read like 3 of his novels, and I've liked them all, including this one. Because I think it's another case of a book being better than a film, and this is kind of an unfilmable book. And, if I think about what Cronenberg did with Naked Lunch and sort of give it this whole new spin that's kind of made it, a little bit more profound, but also just the idea of taking the William S. Burroughs character and inserting him into his own adaptation was just kind of a cool idea. Whereas this adaptation is just kind of boring. I mean, it sort of needs less of the sex, I think. I mean, there's more there's characters like Elias Koteas who basically spells out the themes to the audience, and I don't know. I always find that to be something in movies that kind of bugs me.
But I think a film as weird as this needs that. Maybe. The funny thing though, Jim, is that sex scene that you mentioned that is just ridiculous, really. You know what it reminded me of? Did you and Andrew? Did you guys? I know you're doing Soderbergh for the next Directors Club podcast. Did either or both of you watch Schizopolis yet?
That's a good point. No, that's a good point.
It reminded me of those scenes where he comes home and generic greeting return. It was that kind of absurdity of the way she was talking. I'm like, there is not a stuck up person in the world where this is their version of dirty talk at all.
Right, and I realize that in the real world that I would hope that the majority of people don't get off on actual car crashes.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah, but just
if you're gonna get like some sort of an absurd way of dirty talk in bed, that's just going absolutely what's the word I'm looking for? Anatomic. With your word choices. That's certainly something different.
Well, before we get too far astray, I wanted to go back to the what you mentioned with David Cronenberg and J.G. Ballard and The Naked Lunch. In the Crash book, which I've not read, does the main character's name James Ballard, or is that just something that he did cheekily?
No, his name in the book is James Ballard. But it's told in first person, and it's almost like reading the journal of kind of like a deranged philosopher who's trying to understand his own sexuality and its relation to how we're hardwired to technology, and almost as if we're like getting off on the idea of a car being this, device that we're transfixed by, and how he's sort of tying that in thematically in the book. There's and the explicit descriptions of the sex is even more crazy in the book. I mean, like I haven't read it in a few years, so I can't like give a specific example of it, but I just remember like, I can't imagine this shit being in a movie. And so, I mean, in that regard, I think Cronenberg actually, had a very tame approach. And obviously, there's only so much you can get away with on screen. But
he gets away with a lot, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there are 11 sex scenes in this movie, which I can't think of too many films that would be put out in even an art house theater that has that volume of individual sex scenes. I mean, if you look at the movie, it's almost structured like a porno, like around those. Sure. But then it's got the car crashes on top of the sex, and very curiously, almost every sex scene in the entire movie, including the oral sex at the beginning in the hangar, it's always from behind. And almost all of the car crashes in the movie, with the exception of the James Dean crash and the initial crash where James Spader crashes into Helen Hunt, it's like that's bumping from behind, like where the cars are kind of, doing the same thing. I like that there are a number of interesting. I mean, like the thesis is pretty obvious, but Cronenberg has a really good way of doing all of these things to make it, just underscore and position people in the same way. I think the movie is supposed to be disconnected and edited weird because the characters are disconnected, and even when they form their little crash reenactment club and do that, even then they're completely in their own space, which is kind of the same thing of when you're in your own little car and you're in your own little world or whatever. I think there's just as a structural sense, and I guess this is why I start to really love Crash, is that it was really well thought out, and he doesn't do it with editing or dialogue. He does it with actual images, and even the camera work itself is probably the most sophisticated David Cronenberg movie. There's lots of like in-car cameras, lots of big crane shots, and lots of weird like up high, all those shots on the apartment where you can see the intersection of the 401 and the 400, the big Canadian highways in Toronto. It's very elegantly shot, and it's shot in a way that no other movie I can think of is shot, which kind of makes it awesome, because how many movies can you say are unique in that? Because people copy. No one really ever came back and copied Crash. It's a one-of-a-kind movie.
I wonder why.
It's it's interesting when you put it in context of there are 11 sex scenes in this movie. I think that was like one of the problems I had, not with the sex, but the fact that it was just like, all right, here we go. Here's another fucking sex scene, and it's going to be 8 minutes long. And aside from one or two that are interesting, like the one you mentioned, most of them are just a sex scene. And I just found it really tedious after a while. And
it's supposed to be, because they can't get themselves off.
Yeah, and that's not that great as a viewer, I don't think. Like, there's not much of a plot here. There's not even that much character development. It's just sort of going through the motions of, let's do something extreme and then have sex. Let's do something extreme and then have sex. Let's do something extreme. And that's all it was over and over again. There are things in this movie I liked, and I can get to those. But just overall, the whole thing, for me, was pretty boring and tedious and repetitive.
But that's one of the things that comes back down to like sexual addiction, though, right? Is the idea is that you keep raising the stakes higher and higher and getting something darker, more dangerous, kinkier, what have you. until you can't get enough and you've gone over to a full extreme, and that's kind of what they're doing. At first they're doing it like just on a car, then they're doing it in the car, then they're crashing the car, then she's fully injured after a car, and it's how far do you go? Do you both have to be laying there broken and bloodied before you're finally going to get off? And it's got that parallel to how far do you have to go if you're a sexual addict? Because most of these people, they sort of seem to be sexual addicts. And that's the thing. How far do you have to go until you can finally get off in that cold, strictly sexual, not at all about intimacy way?
Well, and the final shot, it ceases to be about sex. The final shot is like sex is just something to fill the space until they can properly kill each other with their cars. I mean, that's
sorry.
what...
I'm giggling at the way of saying sex is a way to fill the space.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, they definitely have a death wish.
Like Elias Koteas' character, I mean, obviously they're reenacting. Let's get into this because I think it's really interesting. The celebrity angle of the movie. About 3 years ago at the Art Gallery of Ontario, there was an Andy Warhol exhibit, but it wasn't the it wasn't like the soup cans and a lot of the like sort of really known Warhol stuff. It was an entire art gallery of Andy Warhol's take on celebrity, and it was curated and put together and everything by David Cronenberg. And I was at the launch of it where he gave a maybe an hour lecture where he had almost every piece in the collection just on like PowerPoint, I guess, and he talked about each piece, and a lot of it was car crash victims, and then a lot of just like I'm thinking Troy McClure, but that's the Simpsons version. Whatever the real life Tony
Tony Robbins?
No,
the guy from Saturday Night Live.
No, like just sort of these fake, like even in the 50s, fake put together, Beach Bunny kind of celebrities or whatnot. And I found, I mean, this is well after Crash, but then I immediately, when he was giving this talk, all I could think of was Crash, because of like the best written dialogue or monologue in the movie is Elias Koteas's speech of the James Dean, like lovingly going over every detail before they put on this performance art of James Dean's fatal crash. So and the final line is when he died, he became immortal or whatever. In that the actual act of this instantaneous destruction made him a bigger celebrity than if he maybe had worked 10 years. And then the next crash that they were planning on doing, it actually happens in the movie, just not with Elias Koteas. It happens with his buddy going off to the side. Is the Jane Mansfield car crash where I don't know if she was driving or not, but she was in the car with her family and they rammed from behind like a tractor trailer, and they didn't have guards, so the car went right under the tractor trailer. And I mean, there was always this thing that she was decapitated. I don't think she was actually decapitated, but either way, the kids lived in the back, and her boyfriend, husband, whatever at the time, were like instantly annihilated.
She was scalped, wasn't she?
Yes, she was scalped. And in Crash, you actually see, I guess the character's name is like Seagrave or something like that. You see the wig splattered on the side of the car, and he went and did the Mansfield crash. And it just seems like, imagine if Crash came out in 98 instead of 96, which would have been like 5 months after the Lady Di crash.
Geez.
There was no mention of the Grace Kelly crash. There's just an interesting collection of celebrity car crashes, and they only go into two of them. I don't know, maybe in the book. I've heard in the book that he's stalking Elizabeth Taylor to kill her in a car crash. Is that something they didn't bring into the film? I don't know if you remember, Jim. Or
I don't know. Not necessarily. It's funny though. The way you're recapping that this whole collection is it's kind of reminiscent of. I don't know if you remember Tobey Maguire's character in Wonder Boys.
Yeah.
But it's this whole like monologue about all the celebrity deaths, and he sort of repeats them back in this robotic fashion, and I just remember that whole thing being like, wow, it's pretty fucked up how celebrities have died in these horrific ways, and the vast amount is really disturbing.
And it's equally fucked up that he knows them all and he can rhyme them off. Like the fact that that Vaughn, that the Elias Koteas character, knows this thing down to the last detail. That's pretty screwed up as well. And then what's the line, like, when they're driving away after the performance, and he turns to Helen, the Holly Hunter character. He goes, "And with that, he was immortal." Was that too glib?
Yeah, well, that's just him getting off on his own awesomeness, right?
Yeah.
Like that's his.
Did I get that?
I want you to stroke my ego, so I'm going to play this fake modesty or whatever. That was my take on that, because Koteas' character is an absolute brute of a human being in this movie. He's just first off, he's a pretty ugly man already, and they make him, like, with his close cropped hair and the balding and he and just the clothing that he's wearing, and that the car that he's driving is actually the same model that JFK was assassinated in. They have a little bit about that as well in the film, which is interesting. But yeah, he doesn't strike you as the type of character that would feel or regret or really want to go back over something. Like he was, but he has this awesome, like, it's totally goofy. It's one of those great, like, stoner lines in the movie. I think I have, since we haven't heard it, I don't know if you opened the show with his line or not, Andrew.
No, it's Jim's song is in the opening bit there.
Let me see if I can actually. Oh yeah, here it is. It's there's a benevolent psychopathology that beckons us towards the car crash, which is a fertilizing event rather than a destructive event, a liberation of sexual energy, mediating the sexuality of those who have died with an intensity that's impossible in any other form. To experience that, to relive that, that's my project. And then immediately after this sort of really sort of here's your movie in one in one line of dialogue, they go back to something that he was talking about before, about what about the reshaping of the human body by modern technology. And then he says, oh, that's just a crude sci-fi concept, which is hilarious because that line is completely dismissive of the last 10 years of David Cronenberg's filmography in a single line, and also dismissive of the first half of the film. But it also finally says that at one point I don't believe that crude sci-fi concept that Vaughn felt that way. It's just that he did all that, with Rosanna Arquette's character and the awesome, like, I don't know, recovery thing that James Spader has on his leg after his car crash, the sort of like man-machine cyborg thing. And it's like, well, that wasn't enough, so we got to go to the next level. And the next level is to actually be mangled in a car death or whatever, which he eventually gets his wish in the film.
The issue I mainly have with this movie, it's just not fun. I mean, I'm not expect because even with something like Videodrome, which is sort of like this grandiose science fiction body modification, S&M meets television sort of bold statement about humanity and all that, like, that's Cronenberg's style. But I think even Existence, it's a goofy movie. It's a lot more fun, even when he's got like these sly commentaries on either video games or television, and it's in here. I know it's more in the book, but it's less in the movie. Like, just because the movie is wall-to-wall sex scenes, and all the sex scenes are very cold and clinical. It's just not interesting to watch after a while. You sort of become numb from the whole experience. And I know it's kind of like, the idea is these characters want to reinvent the ideas of sex and death, collide them together, but at the same time, if the characters are disconnected and just obsessed with their fetishes, there needs to be more there other than Elias Koteas spouting off his ideas. I mean, for me to sort of get any sense of desire to want to rewatch this or get more out of it. I mean, I know Cronenberg, because I only heard like a few minutes of his commentary. He sort of wanted this to be a cautionary tale of sorts. Like
about
just
what?
To sort of state like we're doomed to like have a lack of interpersonal interactions, and he's almost concerned at the same time he embraces technology, and he has this feeling of, and I know he brought it up in the Videodrome commentary that at one point I feel like I'm obviously utilizing technology, but I'm also concerned about what it's doing to our humanity. If it's going to isolate us, if it's just going to completely leave us, inhuman to some degree. And this movie is an experience of people not, showing any sort of humanity or taking the romance out of sex. And after a while, it's just kind of like
robotic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I mean, maybe that's just to reflect the character's state of mind, but...
Yeah, don't the characters to you seem like they're all drugged? They all...
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're numb. It's the sex addict. Rick Ryan mentioned it earlier. I think he nailed it. And it's that detachment sex addict aspect. I'm sure that is completely intentional. The only one that really shows like a real animal nature where he's really going is Vaughn, because Vaughn actually is the guy that sees the future. He knows what he needs to get, whereas the rest of the characters, Rosanna Arquette, Holly Hunter, Deborah Kara Unger, James Spader, they don't know what they want. In fact, I think they all latch on to Vaughn because he is kind of like the Messiah. He's the religious figure that's going to lead them to the next state of existence. And in the end, I think he goes too far for them, but his death actually allows them to now take that path. Like, I mean, the best sex scene in the film is when Elias Koteas has sex with Deborah Kara Unger in the back of the car, and it's in the car wash. And it's constantly like them having sex, and it's very violent, and then all of the suds and fluids and technology and everything of that. Like, there's a lot of, I think every one of the sex scenes has interesting images in it, but that's the one where everything comes together, and like that's the ideal of what the film was capable of merging. And oddly enough, it, like, sex-wise, it's probably the other than the fact that he's fairly violent. I mean, he leaves bruises all over her body. But I mean, at this point, you've gotten well past just rough sex, so it's almost quaint that it goes backwards, but it becomes the best sex scene, like the best realized sex scene, the most interesting, the most compelling, dare I say, the most erotic sex scene in the movie. For me, that's what I really like that scene, and I think it stands head and shoulders above all of the other ones.
Now, you know what's actually crazy about that scene, since you bring it up, is, as I say, since I was watching this movie on my phone, I was using my big doofy headphones with it, and that scene sounds amazing. The actual, like, the way they've mixed the sound to get that car wash kind of thumping, pounding sound, which of course lines up with the two of them going at it. It's incredible. And the other thing that sounds awesome in this movie is anytime Vaughn's car is around, because you've got that kind of Camaro low rumble,
carburetor sound.
Yeah, those moments. Cronenberg's movies are deceptively well mixed when it comes to sound, and just in those two moments, and especially through headphones, I was just like, "Geez, this is gorgeous."
Yeah,
and of course, you get just to finish off that scene. You also get that great visual of like her like high heel foot just knocking down the armrest, just to kind of put an exclamation point on what's going on.
Yeah,
No?
no, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the sound, the actual score of this film is really good. I think Cronenberg has used the same. He's a Canadian musician, Howard Shore. I mean, he's done all sorts of stuff. I think he did the Lord of the Rings movies, but this is a really good score. The actual score is this. It's funny because when we get to Paul Haggis' Crash, the scores are similar in that they're both kind of atonal, non-musical soundtracks, and I guess when you're making a movie with the title Crash, you're going to go with that. But I really do like all of the sort of peripheral stuff. The score, the opening title sequence with the score is really good. It maybe gets you more pumped for the movie than the movie settles in a much more drier pace. But it's a great combo. It's very technology driven, and it's one of Howard's scores, probably one of his best scores. It really struck me as being something special when I watched it this time.
All right. Anything else?
Well, I was not to get too far off on a tangent because I know that Jim and Andrew, you guys haven't seen it yet, but I'll be curious to hear what you both think in a few weeks when you get to see Shame. What you think of how Crash and Shame relate to one another, because there's threads that I can see in both, but again, I'm not going to go too far down that road because it's pointless to talk about it if you haven't seen it. But I will be interested to hear. That's one of the recent films I've seen that I got elements from in Crash. I got, probably because I'm just thinking cars, I got little traces of Drive in this movie. No? Yes? I'm crazy? Just
there's cars.
It might have just been aesthetically, to be honest.
Well, okay. Here's one of the problems I had with this movie. You mentioned that it's sort of along the same parallel lines as a drug user. You got to keep upping it to get your high, to get your fill or whatever. And I never thought that the movie really did that. I thought it was a pretty straight line. Like, it seemed like all of the car stuff, it never really amped up to 11. It never built to anything. It just felt kind of like the same speed throughout the entire movie.
That sex scene with Rosanna Arquette is pretty disgusting and disturbing.
You mean the wound fucking?
Yes.
Yeah, see, that's
the moment in the theater we turned into one. Did he just fuck her in the scar?
That's awesome. That was awesome. That was Cronenberg total. Like, I loved all the scars, all the makeup that went into this. I mean, it was very rubbery, kind of like Videodrome is, but still
is that all
very,
the way.
very sickly looking. And I loved all that. The minute you see Elias Koteas and he's already got scars, like, right away, like, you identify this character as somebody who's been there and who's in the world already. And it just builds up to that really awesome James Dean recreation scene. Like, at that point of the movie, I said, okay, this movie just got awesome. That whole sequence is amazing. I love the monologue, and the detail that went into recreating it, and the viciousness of the whole thing. And then you've got the audience sitting aside, and you get all their reaction shots and whatever. Like, sorry, I know you just talked about this, but for me, that was the high point of the movie, and I was like, this is a great concept. Run with this. And then, as you mentioned, they don't really. They go back and just kind of do what they were doing. The whole celebrity thing is kind of done away with. They talk about Jane Mansfield, Crash, and it comes back as somebody else did it on the side. We didn't get to see it or anything. Like, I thought that concept was great, but no, it just kind of turns into them. I think there's 3 sequences in the movie of him just sort of driving behind Deborah Kara Unger and, like, barely bumping her and just kind of swerving around. And at first I'm like, okay, this is going to be an intense, cool scene, much like Drive, like you mentioned. Like, that was the only Drive vibe I got. And then nothing really ever comes of it. They stop in a gas station and pull away. That happens like 3 times. Or he corners him in that dark, like, impound lot or whatever, and crashes into him, but it's like very lightly and just kind of, it was like foreplay or something that never really went anywhere.
For these people, I gotta wonder if like the gas station is their safe word.
Yeah,
exactly. And by the way, if you're gonna have a stunt driver that looks nothing like your main actor, you need to turn the camera angle down a little bit, or shoot it from behind or something. That was ridiculous. That was so clearly not Elias Koteas following her in that one sequence where he was in that big silver car. I know movies do that all the time, and it's a nitpick, but I was like, come on.
It's funny because some of the earlier shots in the movie, again, because he's got that convertible Lincoln, and you've got these 3/4 shots of the camera like planted in the car with him, and they're really good, and it clearly is him. Like there's, yeah, you're right.
That was part of the problem, though.
But yeah,
I thought that was part of the problem because they kept cutting to his face, and it was clearly him driving, not with a, I don't know what you call it, with a compositing a screen in the background. It was clearly him driving. Then they'd cut away to like they'd zoom out, and it clearly wasn't him. So it made it even worse that you see his face really clearly, and then they zoom out, and it's a completely different guy. Again, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter, but it definitely was distracting me. It took me out of it a little bit.
Well, the one thing I will say that that was distracting, and I went through this actually with a lot of Cronenberg's movies. My office is very much in Cronenberg's neighborhood. He tends to shoot in the same sort of area of Toronto, like the Fly is set in this area and Videodrome is set in this area, and so I kept getting taken out of the film because I knew the neighborhoods and I knew the roads they were driving on. That moment you were talking about with the gas station, it actually kind of makes me laugh because they're driving along in just east of the downtown core, and when they pull into that gas station, they are miles away. I know exactly where that gas station is because I grew up in that neighborhood. I was like, you just drove across town in this kind of a scene. So that unfortunately kept distracting me out of it. I was playing the "Hey, I know where that is" game.
That area where the Gardner turns into the Don Valley Parkway and splits off to Lakeshore to go to the beaches, like Toronto filmmakers love that stack of roads. I mean, that scene. It's funny because this movie reminds me a lot of, for whatever reason, in tone, in style, in pace, as Adam Agoyan's 1 year later movie, The Sweet Hereafter, which centers around a car accident and also is shot a number of scenes, and it also has an awesome car wash sequence. Like, it opens with a great Ian Holm stuck in a car wash, which is a great, his metaphor, blah, blah, blah. But there's a scene where his daughter calls him and asks for money, and it's a mirrored shot of, like, within Crash, of that, the camera planted, like he probably planted his tripod right down in the same divots left over from the other one, and I mean, Toronto has that raised highway that goes through it, and I mean it's what Elias Koteas eventually crashes his car off of, I think. And Cronenberg gets a lot of really great shots, and he gets a lot of great shots of real traffic. Like you were saying, that they don't up the bar in terms of speed, but the road, like, I don't think you need to do this like Bullet or Ronin or Fast and the Furious or whatever, because the roads are just inherently dangerous of themselves. Like, there's a scene where he just moves slightly out of his lane and has to recorrect. He doesn't actually crash the car. He just knocks off the side view mirror the first time he has Helen Hunt in the car with him. And that scene is more dangerous than most car chase movies. Like, there's a real sense of danger, and he always has the roads and the cars looking like parts of the roads are like wounds. Like, the one thing that I truly love aesthetically about this movie is the overhead shots from James Spader's apartments, where all the roads look like human anatomy, and the cars are like little white and red blood cells racing and moving around. They look like high school 16 millimeter films of veins and shit. And I really think that he just I don't know if the book would ever be capable of giving you the image that he provides, the imagery, and that's what really steps this up for me.
I could sense that a little bit. Like there are things about this movie that I really, really respond to, including the cinematography, the score. I mean, it could also just be, again, you know, my own personal biases, having read the book, where in the movie there's just a lot that was downplayed, including, you know, how the role of technology is. Like Ballard is very paranoid. It sort of infuses that into the lead character a bit more effectively than James Spader does, where he's just. I mean, I almost wonder if it would have been an interesting choice to have Elias Koteas as the main character in this movie, because in some way, like I at least by reading the book, it does feel more like from his perspective. Like there's a lot more philosophizing about things, and I'm not saying that, you know, I wanted to see more of that in the movie, because it's sort of jarring to experience like these really detached characters, and then all of a sudden Elias Koteas is, you know, I mean, I guess that's sort of the point too. He has to play the role of the Messiah, the guy who has all the answers, or at least the idea of, you know, this recreation that seems really arousing for everybody involved. But I mean, again, with the book, telling you about it is one thing, and showing it is completely different. And other than like some elements within the movie that Cronenberg always brings to all of his movies, including, we mentioned, the focus on scars. It could just be the fundamental basic feeling I get from the movie. I'm just numb, and I don't find it a fun experience to revisit this movie in the same way I would with Videodrome or The Fly or Existence. And I'm not saying that every single Cronenberg movie has to have the same result, but I just have a preference for his other films over this one.
Well, if Videodrome was the film that really maybe got him out of... Because for years, David Cronenberg was considered just the absolute, like, trash meister. Like, he was... there was actually a whole movement in the Canadian newspapers and that, because his films were in these tax loopholes, so they were getting tons of public money. But Videodrome seemed to be the movie that got him serious, like, credibility. And then if you look at the films that he made, so he went to the States for a while and did a couple commercial films, and then he came back and started making things like Dead Ringers and Naked Lunch and Butterfly, and then eventually Crash. And you can see that Crash is kind of the long upward mobility within world film circles. And I mean, Crash made some major waves at the Cannes Film Festival. It won. I don't think it won the Palme d'Or, but it won a major prize, and it was almost like that.
Something I think it won for
and
like
his, and his films started to get less genre-y and more like really arty, and then Crash kind of was the wall. After Crash, he made Existence, which is kind of like a remake of
throwback
of Videodrome, just with gaming technology instead of cable technology. And what a missed opportunity. I mean, I love Willem Dafoe, and he's great in Existence as Gaz, the guy who installs in a garage like a black market gaming port. Wouldn't it have been a great cameo to have Elias Koteas in the James Dean mechanic costume in there? It would have been a nice little weird connective moment in the movie, but I guess it was not meant to be.
No, I definitely like where Cronenberg has gone since this film. I mean, even with something like Spider, I know a lot of people don't have a positive response to that film. Like, a lot of people sort of feel that movie is way too detached, and also has kind of a pull you under the rug sort of ending, although to me that is a very, again, effective portrayal of mental illness, to where, again, I think of Clean Shaven or a Lodge Kerrigan portrayal of you really get inside the character's head to where it's jarring and completely like you just don't know how to respond to what the character is doing in that movie and whether or not it's really happened or if it's all in his head. And that sort of has been played to death in a lot of movies, but Cronenberg's approach to that I find really interesting. But again, for this, like, it's more interesting to read about than to watch, or at least with the sex scenes, they just, I don't know, there's too much of that and not enough characterization. Like, I don't understand the motivation other than, they just want to get off, and that's that, and that's just, there's nothing more to it than that. I mean, there's a lot more to Elias Koteas' character, and I like that component in the movie, but overall it's not enough to really carry it for me.
Well, I find the most transgressive thing in the movie, and I guess it's been done in other films, but for some reason it's just the speed and the way it's handled in this film is that, he has the car crash with Helen Hunt and her husband.
It's Holly Hunter, by the way.
Sorry, have I said Helen Hunt more than once?
Yes.
Holly Hunter, sorry. Absolute apologies. That's bizarre. But it is completely in the names, not in the... Holly Hunter and her husband. Her husband goes right through the windshield. It's a pretty, it's a scary sequence that's really done well. But he immediately fucks the widow of the man that he's just murdered in a way, and I find that to be the actually the most transgressive thing in the movie. It just struck me as wow, this just went there in a span of about 15 minutes of screen time, and then they kind of dump Holly Hunter's character off to the side, and she's not really all that important.
Are you saying they leave her on the side of the road?
They leave her on the side of the road. Why did I not come up with that? Thank you for that.
A really quick aside, I just really I rewatched Death Proof, and there's a moment with Michael Park's character talking about, I have a theory about why this guy does what he does. I think it's some sort of sick sex thing. And he's all the blood and the glass. I think he gets off on it. So I'm just oh, well, that's an appropriate time for me to rewatch Death Proof, I guess, if it's going to tie it to that. But obviously,
there's a crash, Cronenberg reference in Tarantino.
Hey, Scorsese put this in his top 10 of the decade, for crying out loud. There are a lot of people who can get behind this movie.
Because I think it mercilessly fucks with film grammar. I think if you're a film structure nerd, Crash is interesting in so many ways, because it really is in the same way actually that Scorsese's what's the one he did with Nicolas Cage?
Bringing Out the Dead. That movie fucks with you and your interest and your ability to stay engaged with the movie very, very, very similarly to Cronenberg's Crash.
Well, I don't think there's a payoff for me to get fucked with this movie. Other than, realizing, oh, they just want to die? Okay, that's that. I mean, there's definitely more going on than just, them having a death wish in the end. I mean, maybe they realize we're never really going to be completely satisfied, and it turns into, this existential romance of sorts, but it's not enough for me to get invested in and I've tried. This is a movie that because I'm such a huge Cronenberg fan, I probably will rewatch this in a year. I'm just not excited about it.
Ditto. Any final words then on Haggis Crash? Or sorry, Cronin Crash?
That'd be a great name for a band.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone feel the need to dish out star ratings or anything?
for me, it's a 3 out of 5. I enjoyed it. As I said, I liked a lot about it. It's not my favorite Cronenberg by a long shot, but it sounds like right behind Kurt, I enjoyed it the most here.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to a 5 out of 5. But
so
I feel that
baffling.
way about almost every film that the guy has ever made. And while, yeah, I agree that it's a film that you really respect more than you love. But I'm
Okay.
completely on board with that.
I can sense that. I mean, again, I think it's an interesting film, and I like the ideas presented, especially in the book. But for me, it's not that exciting to watch. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 for me.
I'd be at 1.5, I think.
Ooh.
So yeah, it's not compelling to me at all.
I guess, and the thing is, I guess that's fitting, is because this is a movie about people's twisted view of sex, and if there's two things, sex and comedy, that what turns one person's crank does not turn the other person's crank. So if what you're saying is it doesn't do it for you, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. And maybe I'm offended that he takes the fun out of sex. Come on. It's not cool.
All right.
Well, do you think? I mean, this film had a lot of controversy when it came out. Do you think that the controversy is well founded? Like the controversy was not so much on the sex; it was the juxtaposing sex and violence so closely. I see that doesn't bother me in the slightest, and in many ways, it makes it actually easier, not harder, because you don't really treat any of these people as real people. They're almost robots in and of themselves. But
Yeah, I mean,
it caused a lot of controversy when it came out.
It's just a different.
We could probably be talking for like another hour about that. I think the kind of people who are offended about this kind of movie are the people who get offended just when they hear the concept of a film. It's the kind of people who, they're not like anybody on this recording. They're just going to write a film off when you give them that one line of, well, it's a film where a guy goes and does Serbian porn, and then start filling it in and just not give it a chance. Those kind of people, they're always going to be offended.
Yep, you got it. I mean, it's not. It's cleaner even than something like a sadomasochistic. Like think about the GIMP sequence in Pulp Fiction. I mean, it's the equivalent of that, except with cars, with mechanical. Like the characters don't even touch each other in a lot of the film. The getting off is not even that intimate. It's separated. From each other.
And even with something like Secretary, which James Spader was in, wasn't that kind of about fetishes? And I think that James Spader's fetish in that was Maggie Gyllenhaal's ass or something. Like, I just remember that, like, that movie to me was at least fun to watch with Maggie Gyllenhaal's sort of go for broke kind of performance and her interest in S&M, I guess. That to me was a little bit more playful, and Crash is sort of like the antithesis of that. But I just remember finding parallels, at least not necessarily in the way James Spader acts in that movie, because it's completely different than Crash. But again, it's not necessarily just about their individual fetishes, but they're longing to connect in some meaningful way, and eventually they sort of come to terms with each other. And I think that's a little bit more, I don't know, kind of a nicer, redeeming version of Crash, where it's like, oh, I that's kind of how I feel. At least there's hope. But Crash just doesn't leave me with that at all.
So your message to David Cronenberg is lighten the fuck up.
Well, he kind of has. I mean, he's gotten a little bit more, I don't know if I wouldn't say conventional, because he still has his, moments of graphic violence, especially, in the opening scene of Eastern Promises, I kind of know this is a Cronenberg movie. And there's certainly moments in History of Violence where, the violence is emphasized in a very Cronenbergian fashion, but I like where he's going, and I'm actually very excited to see Dangerous Method, although I hear he's
not
incredibly
very good.
good. Yeah, I haven't heard good things.
Now, the last thing I wanted to say is, has anyone seen Fast Company? It's actually one of the few Cronenberg films that I've not seen, and it's a auto racing movie.
Yeah, I know.
It's a hard movie to find.
I have a friend who is not a fan, so he didn't give a specific review of it, but he didn't think was very good. So, but I do want to see it because it is also one of the few Cronenberg movies I haven't seen.
Okay. On that note, I think we can move ahead. All right, before we move on to Haggis Crash, I would like to say I wish that Marina could have made it. She, at the last minute, all her internet went down in her house thanks to some security guy in there messing with their stuff. But it would have been interesting to see have the female perspective on Crash, since it's all very sexual and sadomass and stuff. I'd be curious to see what her thoughts are, and the Canadian dick sucking too. That would be important too. So,
well, this is the first time this is the first movie club podcast ever that has not been a Canadian majority.
Yeah,
Ooh.
right, half and half,
50-50.
Mm-hmm.
But both filmmakers are Canadian.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I didn't realize Haggis was Canadian. That's right, or is Canadian. And I guess, and one other thing is Jim and Ryan are new to the show. You guys have never been on the movie club, so that's also originally that was the whole plan of the movie club. Like, that was the idea, is constantly rotating people, changing it up all the time. Some people would bow out and come back in. I think it sort of fell by the wayside because Sean really was the only one with recording capabilities for a while, and then it fell to me. But I don't know. You guys, I know, can record, obviously. So.
Oh, definitely. In fact, I'm honored to be on the Movie Club podcast and I'm also grateful that you guys haven't sued me for borrowing the format. Basically, I mean, as I've said many a times with our show, the Directors Club, a lot of it has to do with my enthusiasm for everybody's shows in the community here with everybody in Movie Club. I've been a big fan, so it's great to partake and be a part.
Awesome, and we are a fan of the Directors Club as well.
And there is an insane amount of Toronto film bloggers. Like Ryan and I last night were we have a monthly meetup in a bar, and we had like half of the basement of that bar at one point with a crowd of people. And I mean, I'm happy to bring. I mean, Ryan's been on our show. We've both been on Ryan's show. But it's nice to tap into sort of all the expertise and knowledge just in like my corner of the woods here. So yeah, it's great to have you on the show, Ryan.
Well, I'm kind of a whore behind a mic, and not ashamed of it. But I certainly love listening to you guys talk on your own show, and always jump at a chance to do something else that I don't have to do the heavy lifting. That's for damn sure. Like you were talking, it's kind of funny. You're talking about having it as a rotating people coming in and out, and that is very much the style of my show. I struggle to get people back just because I find more and more people that I want to get on there, and it's just the unfortunate side effect that I didn't count on is I end up building a rapport with a person either by knowing them personally, like Kurt, or by something like you, Andrew, where I lob you like an email every other day that goes back and forth from the office, and then I don't have them back on the show to take advantage of that chemistry.
I want to throw a big shout out too to Alicia, Sean from Film Junk. His wife should be having her baby any time now. I think that's most of the motivation of Sean's last minute unavailability.
Yeah, this is the first time. Well, you were mentioning before we even started recording. A, it's the first time no Film Junk guys have been on this show, and B, this is the first time where all the participants of the discussion they're all in their own homes. We're all Skyping in separately, so it's not an actual table. Where usually you go over to Sean's, right?
Yeah, there's three of us are usually at Sean's place, and Sean actually just moved to like 5 minutes away from me. Like he lives just up the street now instead of all the way over in Thorold. But it is the perfect. All of us being in our own separate bubbles is the absolute perfect way for us to record on Paul Haggis's Crash, because it's the opening fucking like the thesis Don Cheadle just drops the.
Yep.
By the way, my movie's about this. I'm just gonna tell you right in the opening line what the movie is about.
Sigh.
Okay, so here we go. I think I'm prepared. For the onslaught here. I chose Crash, Haggis Crash for the movie club, mainly for three reasons. One, we've been trying to get Kurt to watch it for like 4 years. Ever since we started talking, you gotta see Crash. You gotta see Crash. We know you're gonna hate it, but you gotta watch it. Two, on row 3, one of our contributors, Rot, wrote a rewatched and reconsidered post, is what he called it, and where he watched Crash, and it became, I don't know if it's still the number one, but it's in the top like 3 most commented posts ever on row 3. Like it got to like 300 comments or something like that.
Because he liked it the second time.
Right.
He liked it a fair bit.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that was the third, and then the third reason is I was quite sure that nobody, like, the hate for this movie that's out there is astounding to me. I'm a fan, and I wanted to
Except for its
see if I could hold my own with
best
all the haters.
Best Picture Oscar and a 76%, Metacritic Rotten Tomatoes thing. So, I mean, clearly a lot of people like the movie. It's just the internet hates Crash.
The internet hates Crash, and I guess that's a good place to start, actually. Maybe we'll go around and just do initial impressions, but is the hate for the movie a big part of it? Because I just don't see it. Like, if you don't like the movie, that's fine, and I'm sure there's reasons why you don't like it. The all-out hatred, like, this movie is absolutely terrible, it honestly baffles me. And I'm just curious if part of that is because it won Best Picture, and people just look at it and go, that is ridiculous. Like, Munich, Good Night and Good Luck, Brokeback Mountain, all were more deserving than Crash. Which is a fair argument, but I think you should judge the film on its own merits too, not just what did the fucking Academy think of it. I don't know. I think it's weird. But anyway, that's a good place to get into it, but maybe we'll go around the table. Initial impressions. Was this your first time? What was your first experience? For me, like I said, I've seen the movie 5 or 6 times. I really like the movie. I remember when it won the Best Picture, and I was surprised and super excited. Like, I was happy that it won because I think it's awesome. And so I've seen it a bunch of times, but I rewatched it last night, and it was the first time I watched it on Blu-ray. And first of all, it looks awesome because it's on Blu-ray, but it's like one of the very first Blu-ray, I think, because I went to special features, and the only special features on the Blu-ray are, or at least the version I have, is trailers. So some other movies that are out, I don't remember what, and then a how-to guide on how to navigate around the DVD with your remote control. It was offensive. That's one movie. That's one reason to hate the movie right there. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I know, to push left and right to.
So even the DVD explains everything to you.
Exactly. So. Anyway, I am prepared for the onslaught. I'm curious what you guys think. We should go around the table. Jim,
Sure.
how'd it go for you?
The first time I saw Crash, I guess it was before all the Academy Award hype, had taken place, and I didn't hate it entirely. There were things about it I liked, and it definitely brought to mind Magnolia. And that's a film I adore, and I love kind of soap operatic melodrama. And, there was just, again, like the characters, even on the first time I watched it, just didn't feel real to me. They didn't feel like they were three-dimensional. They felt calculated in the same way some of the contrivances within the plot felt calculated. And, It felt like a movie that was just preaching in a way that I didn't find interesting. And, when I first saw it, I talked about it with quite a few people, and the majority of everyone I talked to, whether they were, film buffs or not, just thought, you know what? It wasn't anything spectacular. It wasn't anything that we haven't seen before. It didn't really bring anything new to the table in terms of the issues it's trying to raise. I mean, if anything, I guess you could say that it sort of deals with racism in a post 9/11 environment that we all live in today, but the way it approaches that felt very heavy-handed, and it was a movie that at the time I would say is, for me maybe a 3 out of 5. And upon, again, this is a movie I've seen 3 times. I find it less and less interesting every time, and sort of find more things about it that I don't enjoy. And it could be just a general statement that I should bring up, and we'll probably bring this up again when we talk about Soderbergh. But I'm becoming less and less of a fan of the multi-character sort of shortcuts approach to storytelling. It's something that actually makes me want to rewatch films like Babel and Syriana as well. But I become invested maybe in one storyline, and then we immediately cut to a different storyline, and characters never get equal screen time to become fully developed. And that's something that I'm wondering why I'm having that reaction to now, as opposed to like on a first viewing. But Crash is a movie that I don't entirely hate, because there are things about it I find, interesting to watch, including a couple of performances. Matt Dillon is really good. I don't know. I mean, again, I like the overall, style of a movie like this. It's just I don't think it's put together very well. I just don't think it's, a movie that you have to entirely connect with, because there's nothing there. I mean, there's certainly moments where I'm kind of into it, but for like I said, it's not something we haven't seen before either.
All right, Hatter?
Well, I saw this movie in a theater when it came out, so I guess that would be like early summer of 2005. I went and saw it, and at the time I liked it well enough. I wasn't praising it to the heavens. I certainly wasn't pissing all over it. The answer to your question as to its general loathing by much of the internet, yes, absolutely, positively, its Best Picture win is the lightning rod for that, because it's, as I said, while I think it was good enough when I saw it the first time, and to certain degrees it is a good film, in that particular year it was not the best film. Actually, of the 5, it was the least deserving, because you had a class of Munich, Capote, Brokeback Mountain, and what I actually thought was the best film of the decade, Good Night and Good Luck.
I agree.
So among those 5, it was not at all. And because of that, because it got acclaimed with that award, it just became a great big bullseye for everybody to say, what the hell is with this movie.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Can we make a precedent then for this discussion? We'll take that element off the table. I mean, you can
Sure.
talk about it, but as far as like reviewing the actual movie, I think we should just dismiss the Oscar win and talk about it for what it is.
Yeah, you're right. That's all I'm going to say about that, because Oscar does weird things anyway, and I can never begin to understand why they award who they award. I'm only fascinated with who they nominate, and that's the end for me, because it's about just kind of grouping things. So, was it one of the 5 best pictures that year? Maybe. I certainly can't say definitely, positively not, so I have no problem with that when you put it to the top of the class. So yeah, that's the end of that conversation. Where I rewatched it this week for this show, and it was, I think, only the second, maybe third time I'd seen it, and certainly the first time I'd seen it in a good 4 or 5 years, and it does not feel the same way for me that it did the first time I saw it. So it might be that my taste has changed in 4 or 5 years, which is probably a pretty safe assessment. What I look at it now, actually, and it's not a bad thing, I kind of actually, and I could be getting myself in trouble with this, but I drop it into the same category as The Blind Side, as a movie that is not necessarily bad, but to people who watch movies the way we watch movies, it's not what we're drawn to. It's more for a specific audience. I actually see it as the kind of movie my parents would like, or that kind of thing. It's a movie for a certain type of audience, and that's not a bad thing. It's certainly telling a story to people who might not see this story if it was artier or something like that. So it's not great, but it's not terrible either. But unfortunately, my take on it has changed since I saw it the first time. I'm less of a fan now.
Halfyard.
Well, as you know, this was the first time that I watched the movie. My first encounter with the movie, though, was when it played at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2004. I remember reading the description in the guidebook and going, wow, that's a pretty loaded cast with interesting actors. And because, I mean, Don Cheadle, I don't know how big Don Cheadle was in 2005, but like he produced it, and like there was a mention of his involvement in the book. And I kind of almost threw it into my TIFF schedule for that year, but for whatever reason I didn't. Maybe it conflicted or whatever. But I do remember in the film festival crowd, so maybe this counters what Ryan just said or not, but in the film festival crowd, I remembered a lot of people talking about it in a positive way. Then I saw $1 Million Baby, and that movie won the Academy Award for its year. It also won the Screenplay Award for Paul Haggis, and I personally believe that and we talked about this on the Cinecast last time when we were talking about Clint Eastwood. I believe that actually Clint Eastwood directed the shit out of $1 Million Baby, but the screenplay is one of the most obviously blunt screenplays ever written, with some really ugly caricatures, like the Hilary Swank's White Trash Family is just brutally written, and then Clint Eastwood quoting Yeats. I have a thing with that already. There's just so many buttons that Paul Haggis pushes for me. I mean, sure, he wrote Casino Royale, which is a great fucking Bond film, but he was one writer of like 40. So it's really hard to say. Whereas things like $1 Million Baby and certainly Crash, it's very clearly his voice. Very clearly, like he's an auteur screenwriter in the worst possible way, if you don't like that style. So, and then there was like all of this talk on the periphery, and people like you know, if you're a film guy or gal, and you encounter a lot of people that now, because it won the Academy Award, they watched it, or maybe someone recommended to them. And this movie did have a lot of word of mouth around people that don't see films a lot. So you have a dozen people come up and say, "Oh yeah, I watched Crash," and I'm like, "I haven't seen Crash." And like, how could you not have watched this movie? You watch everything. And I'm like, I'm not going to go there, because our friendship or this encounter will get really awkward really fast if I just, you just don't, I wouldn't unload to the average person like I would unload to a film enthusiast, right? So it just became something that just sits there like a wet blanket and move on. And then it becomes this, well, should I watch it just so I can bitch about it? Or, or maybe, oh, God forbid, like Titanic. For whatever reason, I didn't watch Titanic theatrically. It took me years before I bothered, because it looked like the worst fucking Irwin Allen with a much bigger budget and less fun. That was my impression of what Titanic was. I don't know. But anyway.
You were the only one.
Kind of liked Titanic when I finally watched it, and that was to my eternal shame. But
Titanic is great. Sorry,
But anyway, when I watch Crash, I must admit, I can think of two films, well, at least one, possibly two, films that are very similar to Crash, that really strong racial, or even the post 9/11, or the extreme tragedy mixed all together with emotion and whatever, that are worse than Crash. So, finally getting to it, I certainly wasn't a big fan of the movie, but it's far away from, like, it is actually technically a pretty good movie. Like, it's well edited, it's well shot, it's blah blah blah. But I cannot get by a movie that tells me everything these characters don't talk to each other. They talk to fucking you, the audience member. It's really, really frustrating on that level. But the two that I can think of that are worse than Crash are Revolutionary Road. Not Revolutionary Road. Reservation Road. The one with Mark Ruffalo and Jennifer Connelly. And
Never saw
Nothing
it.
is Private, a.k.a. Towelhead, the Alan Ball movie that stars Aaron Eckhart and Toni Collette and the one of the guys from 6 Feet Under. That movie makes Crash look like fucking Citizen Kane. But when someone mentioned Shortcuts and someone mentioned Magnolia, which clearly that L.A. melting pot kind of thing is at play here. I mean, if you put Crash into that box, it is, for me, way down the list. Like, I'm ashamed to even mention it in the sentence because those movies actually, even though Magnolia or Shortcuts. Magnolia, they're both big on melodrama.
Oh yeah,
but the characters, you still get at the humanity of the characters. There are human-like instances in Crash. There's moments in Crash, but for the most part, I really found that on first viewing that the characters and their little turnabouts. Everyone has this very clockwork-like mechanical turnabout. Like, you get the good side, you get the bad side, and that just fucking pissed me off.
Okay, let's see where to begin. A couple of the issues that Jim mentioned, like, first of all, like the structure of the film, the multiple characters, the different threads, all sort of crashing together, if you will. When you say, like, I've seen it 3 or 4 times and it gets less interesting each time.
yeah.
I can see that partly because I feel like that was kind of a trend in the mid 90s. Like, I mean, it's not like it was brand new. Other films obviously had done it before, but through the mid 90s up until the early 2000s, there were a ton of movies that did that. Like a bunch of high profile casts, short little melodramatic intervals or whatever that sort of intertwine with each other. Pulp Fiction does it.
Probably the Pulp Fiction
Shortcuts,
effect,
Magnolia, and like 11-14, and all these movies like this. So, sort of seeing it now, what is it? 7 years later, like you're kind of like, wow, been there, done that. It probably becomes less interesting. And I also think one of the things about the movie, which we can get into later, are some of the really more like emotional, impactful scenes. And once you've experienced those once or twice, they become less impactful and emotional upon subsequent viewings too. So I can see. And you know what? I even admit that myself. I still love the movie, but those scenes don't hit me as hard as they did that first time. 7 years ago. So I think, just by the way that cinema or film, the history, the story of cinema has gone in the last 10 years, it kind of dates itself that way. But I think the obvious thing here to talk about is the screenplay, the dialogue, the way people interact with each other. I know that a huge complaint is, like Kurt said, nobody talks to each other. They're talking to the camera. Like, it's really shrill. Jim, you said heavy-handed. It's very preachy. And I actually don't use any of those words to describe this movie. Because I think it's like talking in parables. It's not really trying to tell anything new, because I think that the message, I don't think it's a message movie. The movie is so obvious and so blunt that it isn't a message movie. It's not preaching at you. It's just giving you entertaining stories where this is the message that happens to be the vehicle to get there. So when people say it's really preachy, I just kind of say, well, only if you want it to be. It's just so obvious that it's preachy that it's not preachy, if that makes any sense.
See, what gets me about that, there's something that Kurt says on your show every once in a while of, it's not the band I hate, it's their fans. And in some way, you know, I mentioned that people like my parents would probably like this kind of movie. There are a whole other subgroup that likes this movie, that likes to be able to point to it and say, see, I understood that, and I understood why race relations are tense, and I understand why racism is bad, so I'm a good person. And meanwhile, they'll go on and they'll carry on about their white bread life and you know, not take anything that this obvious story told into their actual lives. So that's the thing. Like, yeah, the story's a little obvious and it talks at you more than it talks to you, but it's the way that some people have taken that
like
message.
The high road kind of?
Yeah.
Like High Horse or whatever?
Yeah, very much.
Totally.
And it's that it's an unfortunate link that I can't seem to shake. Where a movie like this, or you know, kind of, I mentioned it earlier, The Blind Side, those kind of movies, and the kind of conversations like soccer moms have while they're buying Whole Foods, that bothers me, and unfortunately the film bears the brunt.
Don't you think, at least from my perspective, though, I find it very actually refreshing, because I don't think that in films very often people talk like this. Like, I feel like they skirt the issue in most films. Like, this is extremely
They do it in The Ides of March, a movie that came out recently that I didn't like at all, because it
they
felt
don't talk
exactly
this
the same
badly
thing.
in The Ides of March. Come on.
like
do.
it's so blunt and so not politically correct that I actually find it really refreshing. I can't think of many movies that yeah it's harsh and like heavy-handed and maybe over the top, but that's exactly what I like about it. Like the scenes, any scene where Ludacris is just, that's the guy's name, he's a rapper or whatever.
Yeah.
Anytime
He's
like
good. He's good too. I like him in this movie, and I
his-
like him as an actor.
His scenes, when he just goes off on those diatribes, it's damn near Tarantino-esque dialogue. Some of it is really funny and really
But that
smart
pissed
and really
me off.
snappy.
That's what pissed me off. Like right, that whole sequence where they're in that like posh, I don't know LA. So whatever neighborhood they're in, it's pretty posh. It's pretty like J. Crew kind of thing, and they're dressed like college kids or whatever. I don't know. They're not in gangbanger clothing, and they're having this really sort of meta conversation about, you know, like, why is it that white woman crossed the street, or, you know, he's got this thing, and then they fucking suit up and rob the car. Like, that just undermines. Like, that's not fucking funny. That's and again,
Really?
it makes it very difficult to it makes it very difficult to say, well, wait a minute, everything about this movie is being very serious and very earnest and very preachy, and yet you have that little cute thing. Maybe a better filmmaker could balance that, but it felt like completely undermining.
It's like a London Scream or something.
Yeah, or fucking Boondock Saints or something. I don't know. Like, it just feels so cheesy, derivative, and genre film ish.
No,
and
but
maybe
isn't the whole movie...
Paul Haggis would be better served making those types of films than trying to make the earnest. Like, I guarantee you, because he says, Paul Haggis says, well, I made Crash because I had my Porsche stolen or whatever when I was not in my neighborhood, and, you know, I wanted to understand this. He clearly goes at this that it was a big sort of you know, what's wrong with us as a society. It's an issue film, whatever, not a genre film. And then he does shit like that. That ain't fucking cool.
I don't know. I that's one of the things I like. Like, the whole movie is kind of a contradiction of itself on many levels. It's telling you one thing, but then so many of the characters actually live up to their prejudicial stereotypes. That it's kind of interesting that way. Like, it kind of loops around on each character, loops around on themselves. Yeah, they learn a lesson at the end. They all whatever, but the stereotypes that are involved, at least with these characters in this movie, are all there for a reason. And I disagree. That opening sequence with the two guys when they jack the car, I thought it was kind of funny and kind of a neat, clever twist. I was like, oh, of course, okay, funny.
If this was a European movie, if this was like Michael Haneke or Lars von Trier or fucking Jean-Luc Godard, I mean, if it was like a French film, I don't know where I would stand on that, because that sort of sensibility. But the fact that it's a very earnest American film, even though it is a Canadian filmmaker, maybe there's just something about that American earnestness that just drives the film in the wrong direction for me. And I don't know. I would love to see Lars von Trier's version. Well, actually, I have. It's called Dogville, and it's a much better movie. But
Oh,
yeah, that scene is
more
almost
interesting.
crucial. That scene that you just talked about, that with Ludacris and Lawrence Tate, that scene already put me on the wrong foot. Like, really.
Well, yeah, I will see your disdain for Ludacris and his friend, and I will raise you the two most annoying and miscast white people they could find in Brendan Fraser and Sandra Bullock. Sandra Bullock especially, who, she does not have to play romantic comedy roles forever and ever amen, or the lovelorn woman waiting by her mystical mailbox. If she wants to do drama, by all means, let her do some drama. But my God, was she shrill and annoying in this movie, and I did not care that she had just been jacked at all. And just, I'm sure that a lot of this stuff, it would have played better. This is kind of where I fault Haggis's direction, because I have a hard time believing that she would be screaming what she's screaming at the top of her lungs with the locksmith in full earshot. I gotta wonder if that, like, we've all had those kind of arguments where you don't want somebody to hear your argument. You're kind of like, you're like, Andrew, we really shouldn't have gone that turn. I don't know why the fuck you don't listen to me sometimes. It's that kind of argument. On the page, I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking this is a whispered argument maybe, and he just happens to overhear it. That was the most insane scene, and that was the kind of thing that when I watched the film again, that really, really rubbed me the wrong way.
interesting. I think she's awesome in this movie. Up until this point, I think this is like her best performance ever.
You actually buy that? Because she gets the least amount of screen time. She's arguably the most bankable star in the movie, and she gets the least amount of screen time in the movie. And do you really buy that scene with her maid at the end? I don't buy almost any resolution of any character, but I found that one to actually be the least plausible. I mean, as a bit of irony, it's kind of fine, but as an emotional beat, which I believe that was the intent, I don't think it actually works.
I don't buy that a woman with her status couldn't find somebody who would help her. Like I've just fallen down the stairs. With the amount of people she knows, you're trying to tell me that the only person who would care enough to help her is the maid. I don't buy that for a second.
Well, I'll be honest. I don't really buy any of the characters in this.
Yeah, I see what
so
you're saying.
I don't completely agree with that. I mean, I get what you're saying. Maybe this one just felt. There is one scene for me as well that I just don't connect with. I find it frustrating and I don't like it. But I think the whole movie is full of, no pun intended, ludicrousness.
You've been holding on to that one.
I don't think any of it is realistic. I don't think any of it is supposed to really ring true. Again, it's sort of like fables and parables that are being told with these.
But doesn't that sort of undermine the issue at hand?
No, because again, I don't think. It's hard for me to explain. I don't think there's an. How do I say it? The issue is so obvious that there is no issue. It's just characters that are interesting. Then you follow their story and watch where they go, and watch them redeem or not redeem themselves, and see their story and adventure. I'm not getting any message out of it because the message is so obvious.
with that in mind, though, the whole Sandra Bullock can't find somebody to help her, that's the bridge too far. Everything else, just, plausibility, implausibility, I'm okay. I'm in. That's the one where it's like, no, sorry, you spent that $1 too many. No.
Fair enough.
Or even when Matt Dillon is talking with the healthcare or social worker, just that interaction. I mean, how can he even imagine that he's going to be able to get results or get what he wants from that sort of confrontational attitude he has towards her? I mean, I realize that it's, that how he's going to be in general is foreshadowed when, like he's talking on the phone to her and everything, and she hangs up on him. But then just that face-to-face interaction, and then when he tries to be nice, to me, I think he's excellent in the movie. I tend to like Matt Dillon in most things, but I still find most of the individual scenes like that to ring false, even in trying to, be dramatic in ways that, gets you involved in the story. I find myself really responding negatively to certain moments that, I'm obviously in something like Magnolia, there are tons of ridiculous implausibilities, including the obvious one towards the end. But I feel like Paul Thomas Anderson's world that he creates in there is meant for that. Whereas in here, I still feel like he's trying to ground things in reality, because, I mean, he's sort of portraying racial discrimination. I mean, and it's portrayed as like these individual acts of callousness, and to me that's not necessarily racism in general. I mean,
I don't think the movie's racism at all. I mean, it is, like, obviously on the surface, but I really looked at the movie as, I mean, being that, like, again, you're in your car, you're in your own little world, and everyone out there is against you. So, like, racism is the language with which they attack each other, but
Sure.
really it's a bunch of high-stress assholes being assholes in the moment. And I really, the movie should have been called Crash Hole or something. I don't know, because it really is, and it sort of gets at that LA entitlement thing, and I really think that maybe that healthcare scene with the black bureaucrat, trying to get through to the HMO, I think that's probably a Canadian American, like, that has to be amped up to 11 based on Paul Haggis's public health care in Toronto, and, like, we just don't have these types of problems. So I imagine that was probably jarring to him as someone who moved down to the States at whatever age. I find that every time, like when I watch Breaking Bad or whatever, and they can't get, like, that stuff drives me nuts. And then so first off, it's like everyone is just waiting for the karmic wheel to come around because they're a fucking asshole in the movie, except for Michael Pena, who's not. He's like a super nice guy.
Yeah, he's the one like redeeming character.
And then I thought, well, it's as much about class as it is about race. Now, there's obviously huge parts of the United States that's, the class lines and the race lines can be similar, but I mean, like, the two shrillest people in the movie are the rich people, like like Thandie Newton and Sandra Bullock are by far the most shrill. Like, maybe the Iranian guy, but who was just badly written. Like, a lot of them are, whatever. But I found that it was like and this is not a revelation either. But the further you go up the class lines, the more of an self-entitled asshole you become. Although I must admit, I did like the walk-ons. I really did like some scenes in the movie. I liked Keith David's walk-on. I liked William Fichtner's walk-on. Like, those were two character actors doing their thing. They weren't being like serious issue movies, those were character actor parts in the movie. And the first part with Ludacris was like that, but then he doesn't become like that. And don't even get me started to the ultimate act of class warfare, the final sequence in Crash, or the final revelation of sorry, not Don Cheadle's thing, but the Korean guys smuggling, and then Ludacris being fucking
Moses.
rescue hero. Like, oh my lord. Like, wow. I mean, when Spike Lee did it in Inside Man, like, seriously, you're going to make a heist film about Nazi fucking gold? Like, really? I totally bought it because it was such a trivial detail in this. But for me, that was my straw that broke the camel's back, my bridge too far. It wasn't Sandra Bullock against type or overplaying that scene, because everything is overplayed in this movie. It was like, oh my god, they even went there, and the fact that all the assholes in this movie get sanctified at the end, just kind of like, why couldn't you just let some of the assholes, pay for it?
Sure.
Like, he basically just punishes the people that think they're nice, and rewards or redeems the people that are. I don't buy it. I mean, it's not that I don't buy it. I just find that structure to be so facile and so uninteresting. And that's where I sort of come at this movie. And I guess I forgot to say it before, but I'll say it now. You can tell musically, between Shortcuts, Magnolia, and this. Shortcuts gets Tom fucking Waits. Magnolia gets Amy Mann. Crash gets Ludacris. I mean, like, that's...
Well, now, wait a minute. You talk about character actors. Big +1 for any movie that brings Tony Danza into
I was going to say, now, I don't... that was the moment that completely caught me off guard. I was sitting there going, what?
Which, in kind of a way, which was a slightly interesting little story thread, too, kind of blaming... in a way, blaming Hollywood, in this case, I guess, television Hollywood, whatever you want to call that, sort of blaming them a little bit for some of the prejudicial attitudes in America. I thought that was kind of interesting, too.
Yeah, but they also name-checked the Cosby Show, so...
More or less, but I'm wondering how Tony Danza got that part.
I know. Has he been anything else? He does a talk show, I think, right? Has he been in anything else since Who's the Boss?
I do not think so.
Did anybody else catch Jin in there as well?
Jin
from Lost.
Yeah. Oh, blink and you'll miss him.
Yep. Going back to sort of like unlikable characters or whatever. One thing I thought was interesting, not only class, but also gender. For me, all the women in this film are raving reactionary bitches. Tandy Newton, like, they have reasons for why they're kind of overreacting, but all of them are...
drewbaca035@gmail.com.
Are they not? Tandy Newton...
I'm not completely
You brought it up with the Sandra Bullock thing. Like, Sandra Bullock, Tandy Newton, Jennifer Esposito, they are really reactionary.
The Asian woman that is at the beginning and the end of the
Exactly. Now, that said, I enjoy that. I love, like... When Tandy Newton goes off on Terrence Howard when they're in their bedroom after they've had the encounter with the police, Tandy Newton's not a very good actress. That was awesome. Her performance in that scene, pretty much in the whole movie, is fantastic. And I disagree with the Sandra Bullock thing too. She was awesome. But I thought that was interesting.
Well,
it was more.
What's her name? The Latino police officer that's fucking Don Cheadle.
Jennifer Esposito. Right.
Yeah, she wasn't. She was pretty the movie actually had this one moment early on when Don Cheadle gives his like opening before you even see anyone, it's like the voiceover of God. She's like, "Did you hit your head?" Like, it was almost like, "Oh, okay, so we are going to be self-deprecating about this," but other than there's not a lot of that after that. She seemed to be the female.
She gets really pissed after he answers the phone when they're having sex.
Even just her opening scene when she's yelling at the Asian woman who can't speak English quite properly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What is she says? I didn't blake, I braked.
Mm-hmm.
So no, she gets her moment of being shrill as well. The only female character, really, the only two that seem to get off scot-free is the HMO worker. She, she's, but even she kind of has her little moment in the end.
Yeah, at the very
the Persian doctor, the woman who buys the gun for her father, the convenience store owner, and she buys the blanks. She's the only one who gets away scot-free.
Yep. And Deanna Troy.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like the majority of this movie just reduces people to being simple-minded and unsympathetic, and they just consistently confront one another and yell and point out these stereotypes. And
so many people are, though. That's
but
the problem.
Don't you find it when they're doing that, like the way it's written and the dialogue, it's fun?
Well, it's more fun than Cronenberg's, Crash. I mean, I guess it's to me though, like watching these people, it feels condescending to me, and so like maybe I am looking at it for more, like the sociological standpoint of it, just because maybe I'm wired that way to sort of view this movie as something that's trying to not necessarily like instill a message, but just portray how we interact with one another. And to me, this is like, I don't feel like Haggis has empathy for all these characters in the same way that Spike Lee does with Do the Right Thing.
Yeah, this movie can't lick Do the Right Thing's boots.
No, not at all. And
we don't want to go there.
Well, to me, it felt like that Crash, the screenplay, not the direction, like the visual style. Like the movie, like I said, looks good for its $5 million budget. It looks really good.
Is that all it cost?
Yeah. How they got all those actors, I guess they liked the screenplay. But it feels like 12 Angry Men, like To Kill a Mockingbird. It feels like that era of filmmaking where you really did talk, like really lay it out for the audience in the big speechifying, very clean and clear way. Shortcuts and Magnolia never do that. But it feels like an very old classic Hollywood film. But I don't know, when I watch those films, I just turn my dial down so that they're not overly condescending to me, and I'm certainly not lumping everything, because there's like Ace in the Hole and Anatomy of Murder, which are the furthest thing from earnest preachy. They're really claws out and very witty and smart and blackly comic movies. But there certainly was a huge chunk of films in the 40s and 50s that really did go after these really earnest issues in a very easy to digest, almost facile way. And it feels like Crash was written for that era, but made with all the extremes and language and filmmaking of the modern era. And that mix, maybe that could be interesting. I didn't find in this particular case that it was interesting.
The one thing actually that I got to give this film credit for is I did a thing a little while ago where I talked about there's a lot of films that are set in major cities, period, but major American cities, namely New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, that don't really need to be, that they pick a big city and it suits their need. This is an LA story that's very, very much an LA story. Like everything from that slightly obvious mention of how in Los Angeles everybody drives, so they have to crash into one each other to feel some contact, to even just the way the races relate in Los Angeles, because in Los Angeles you have a very big white population, a very big black population, a very big Latino population, Korean, and so on, and you don't have that in every very large American city or Canadian city. And so in that way, and in just the way that they interact, this is very, very much a Los Angeles story. No, not necessarily one of the greatest ones, but certainly a very, very good LA story.
But look at the way The Big Lebowski or Jackie Brown or Pulp Fiction handles its sort of melting pot of races in Los Angeles. And it certainly doesn't come at it. And I'm not saying that this movie should come at it in the same way, but it doesn't. Like, I like that it just kind of says, well, that it is what it is, and sometimes people don't get along, and there's lots of ways where people bridge. And I didn't buy any of the bridges in this movie. I bought the bridges less because they felt like, well, the character needs that now. I bought that less than I bought the actual frissions. It has to me. It's like what a tourist thinks of what LA is, because he watched, I don't know, Colors and whatever. Yeah, Blade Runner. That's right.
It's really difficult for me to care about their plight, even with Matt Dillon's character. I mean, I feel like they have no inner life to them. They just sort of fail. Like they fail to exist independently of whatever stereotype they're like on hand to embody or debunk in certain situations. And I keep seeing these characters as being on the surface because that's how they see one another.
I cared about the locksmith. Like, of everybody in this movie, he's the guy I care about, because he's the guy who, to look at him, you might think, you might have your own presumptions. But the second he starts talking, and certainly the way he works, he's very, very professional. And when, you get that one quick moment where he goes home, and it's like, this is just an upstanding guy. Like, yeah, of everybody in this movie, he's by far the guy I care about the most.
Right. I at least he's the most likable character, I think, especially once he starts interacting with his daughter, who's adorable, by the way.
Yeah. Well, even just look at the way he deals with Sandra Bullock in that shrill moment. Now, if that's me, I'm gonna say something before I go. I'm not just handing the keys and giving a nod and walking out. Especially after all of that.
He says more by doing that than by saying anything at all.
Exactly.
Like
and that's actually a moment of a well-written character. Mm-hmm. Too bad there's not more of them.
But did you really buy the exchange between him and the shopkeeper? The shopkeeper character was just possibly the worst written character. He's beyond unreasonable. Like, how you would pop veins in your head. Like, this character would not make it through the week.
Well,
he's so shrill.
See, the problem is I've had conversations like that. I do believe sometimes when you're just not being understood on a fundamental level, I've had moments like that where professionally where I've had to walk away from a client and send somebody else over because I was just on my last nerve, because I was not saying anything incorrect and I wasn't trying to screw the person or cheat the person, but there was just something in the way I was speaking that this person just wasn't getting. And I bought that. I've been in that situation.
But did you equally buy the the big sort of turnaround, the big miracle that everyone gets with the blanks when it finally pays off? Did you get the fact that character had to perceive it as an act of God?
Well, no, that's that. Then we're getting back into
because the film is pretty fucking secular. It's pretty secular, except for that character.
No, then we're back into the bridge too far. Their first interaction, I bought it to the letter. The second interaction, okay, but no, not as much.
Like I was. It's funny. I normally don't. I'll give Paul Haggis credit in that he got a rise out of me from that scene, and normally. Like, some people, after they have children, children in peril in the movies, those scenes can be harder to watch because, I don't know, you relate more, whatever. But I generally do not have this problem, whether that's pathological or antisocial. You can tell that to my shrink. But this scene, the fact that he was going to go there, it pissed me off. Like, because, again, it was like fucking... Hilary Swank and her dog that had to be put down in $1 Million Baby. Like, but I kind of knew something was going to go on with the invincibility cloak. But then the moment that it's all coming together, I'm like, oh, he's totally going to go there. Yeah, it really, he got an emotional reaction out of me because I was really pissed off.
Are you talking about where he
Yeah.
says the little girl is his angel, or like the act
when
itself
she runs
of
out, when she runs out, like to take the bullet.
I love that
it
scene.
just
Love that scene.
yeah.
That's the
yeah,
problem, though.
yeah.
It's like I feel like everything that plays out, I knew that was how it was going to play out. Like there was, I mean, even the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, they're blanks, you know, or
Really?
Really?
I never thought that. I thought, well, look at what he's done so far. And that actually kind of pissed me off. It's like, okay, you didn't kill the fucking child? What's going
Yeah.
on? Like, I mean, and then he pulls, Matt Dillon's the fucking hero now? And like, he's like, all the assholes get out of jail free cards.
Get redemption.
That pissed me off. It's like, you know what? You can't be this cynical about post 9/11 LA and then be this fucking happy that, you know, everyone is a hero and everyone will get a fucking medal pinned on their chest at the end. Like, that really started to peeve me off. That's why I would like the Michael Haneke, Lars von Trier, because you know that shit would not. There would be no punch pulling, no facile. For all of its racial epithets and language thrown around, this is the most politically correct movie made about racism ever. This movie itself is the ultimate affirmative action movie. Like, and the fact that it goes against everything that the movie's supposed to stand for, it's just offensive on that level.
And even the role reversal with Ryan Phillippe's character feels completely contrived.
That's the scene I don't like.
Okay.
The whole
You don't
scene
like
where he
because
picks up Lawrence Tate in the cold and he gives him a ride, and the way they talk to each other it's like that. Like, they don't really talk to each other. They don't communicate at all, which maybe that's the message of the movie, but like he starts laughing and it's just weird, and he doesn't say why he's laughing, and then and Ryan Phillippe's character kind of inexplicably just becomes an asshole, and that whole exchange is just weird and doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. Sorry, going back a second to the Matt Dillon saving grace moment where he saves Thandie Newton from the burning car. It hadn't really occurred to me until now, but in terms of like pulling punches, first of all, I really like that scene, especially on first watch. It's awesome that her reaction. She would rather burn to death in that car than have him ever touch her again. And the scene is played out really well. That said, so he rescues her. I think now, this is just occurring to me now, when you talk about pulling punches, it might have been really interesting if everything had played out the same, except for he wasn't able to save her. That she ended up
Deal with
staying in
that,
the car
bitch.
and burning to...
And I don't mean bitch Thandie Newton, I mean Matt Dillon. Deal with now, look at
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
You know? Like, no one gets to feel guilty. Like, no one gets to really feel guilty. They get to feel a little bit guilty, but know that ultimately they're a better person.
Yeah.
They don't get to, like, really feel lost.
I agree. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I still like the scene, but...
Except for Don Cheadle and his mom. Yeah. I guess Don Cheadle, because he's Don Cheadle and he's so freaking good as an actor, I think his actual thread, I mean, he gets the opening and closing, but his thread feels like it has the most weight. And if you go back to the class thing, it's like, oh, he pulled himself up out of the, black ghetto family that he came out of, and his mother's actually, interestingly, like, pissed off that he was successful. It's like, why aren't you suffering with us in the low class zone? You actually pulled yourself up to detective. I mean, he even says, "I'm banging a white woman" when he's, and like, it's like, this is obviously an issue between him and his mother, and that's the only character. Don Cheadle's character is the only character that feels like he has a life outside of the screenplay, and yeah. Yeah, I mean, it again. If you knocked out Brendan Fraser and Sandra Bullock, which really don't have any place or any function in the movie anyway, like, there's just a few characters that could have just gone and made it more like with Don Cheadle being like the main thread that ties everyone together, because he is plot wise the main thread. Like the the story's opening closing bracket, and everyone ultimately is culpable in how far things get to where Lawrence Tate is he the only character that dies in the movie?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you argue he's the sacrificial lamb of all the crimes of hate and racism or whatever, everyone's culpable in the confusion that leads to his death or whatever. They could have made that as an interesting through line rather than, as Andrew says, like a bunch of these little micro morality plays or whatever they are. And then maybe you'd have something to actually grab onto, because I do think that Don Cheadle. It's funny because when he what is he compromises himself for the sake of his career. When he's leaving, he has this just badass. He looks just like Snoopy from Out of Sight. He's walking away and he's got this sort of gang tough hard ass strut to him. And normally he's a very empathic character. And at first I thought, oh well, Don Cheadle just overplayed that scene. But then the more I think about it, the more I wish that Crash was just Don Cheadle. That's my only way mentally I can.
Well, let's face
go
it.
through the exercise.
All movies should be a little bit more Don Cheadle.
Yeah,
to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. No, I also don't like. I don't know. I mean, on one hand, it's the idea of like the Ryan Phillippe is like the character you hope that isn't going to be corrupted, and then he winds up being the one character who kills Lawrence Tate, and that whole contrivance I think is kind of reflective of how this movie seems to play out with a lot of these characters. I mean, at least that scene with Matt Dillon and Thandie Newton works as an individual scene that I was still emotionally affected by. Like even though I know how it was going to play out. I mean, I liked the score. I liked how. I mean, it was a little bombastic, but I still liked it. But there's just these individual moments, and I would have liked to have seen something more streamlined. And the fact that it sort of takes its central, device from Amores Perros, which again, a car crash, and it doesn't really bring anything new to the table. And that's how I felt the first time I saw it. And in a way, I'm just going back to the feeling I get from this movie is condescending and not at all empathic. Especially, I read a couple of things online about how the way Asians are portrayed in this movie, and that to me is questionable. Like how, especially like just towards the end, and having that Asian character like stare into the DVD store in awe of like, oh, this is why I'm in America. I don't like that. That moment rings false. Like so many things in this movie ring false, and especially as we've pointed out, the assholes have their moment of redemption, whereas in something like Magnolia, the assholes get punishment. Thinking of Philip Baker Hall's character especially. I think Paul Haggis is this whole screenplay is clunky to me. And I don't know. I try to find redeeming qualities in everything I see, and there are definitely things in this movie I like, but overall, it's
Any other final thoughts? I will. My final thought, I guess, to retort to a little bit of what you said about not bringing anything new to the table. I'm the complete opposite. I find the movie completely different than any other. Like it or hate it, I find this very different from any other movie.
I'll give it credit that it has the good sense to not drag it out to 3 hours. Like it's like 100 minutes.
Unlike Shortcuts, right?
Well, all the other big
Magnolia.
ones, Magnolia, they're all like 3, because you got so many characters. But of course, that also,
you get more time spent with them,
right? And to me, I think this movie is like an hour and 45 minutes or something. I think it goes really fast for me. Again, just I suppose when you enjoy it, things go quickly. And I also completely disagree of the clunkiness. I think the way everything's tied together and the foresight that it has is, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's smart, but I like the way that it ties together. I like the idea of the blanks being bought right in the beginning, and then how the invisible cloak is tied into the whole thing, and just the whole interaction between Dylan and Tandy Newton, like the way those two characters progress through the film and how it all ties together. I don't think it's clunky at all. I think it's really smooth, actually. But that's just me. So
now,
I would
Paul Haggis comes from TV. Would you, and since this thing has like a multi-threaded aspect already,
and it became a TV show,
would be better as a TV show? Like, would it work better as a?
It is, isn't it?
Long form.
Yeah, I was gonna say they turned it into a TV show.
Oh, they did. And
Yeah.
it failed.
Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper was in it, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, like, so it wasn't the same character. Obviously, the actors are all busy, but like it's hard to nail that down. But
I've never seen it.
They rewrote it like a Crash, like same idea, all new actors.
Yeah, I don't think it did particularly well, but I see what you're saying. This format is a little bit better suited for TV. This idea of all these threads and so on.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's what TV is now, right? Like all of the HBO, AMC, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, these shows. That's what they are. They have a lot more time. Like all these shows still tend to often talk to the camera. Talk to you to get the point across. But you have so much longer, so you don't feel like, you feel like you could at least understand a little bit more why Sandra Bullock is a shrill, uptight, I'm always unhappy, bitch, beyond just the fact that she tells you that over the phone.
Jim, do you want to star rate it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really quickly. I mean, Andrew, do you feel like the coincidences that sort of play out, they're just there to serve as a story element rather than just making a point? Because, like, to me, when Thandie Newton and Matt Dillon meet up together again, that is like to sort of prove this point that, oh, well, Matt Dillon isn't such a bad guy after all. Look, and to me that kind of, again, it just doesn't feel like organic. It just, I mean, on one hand you can sort of get into that because it's melodramatic, and that's just the approach that Haggis has to his storytelling. But to me, I feel like he's constantly trying to do that. Make a point, have not necessarily a message or an overarching theme, but something that just rubs me the wrong way in the end.
So you're asking me, like, it's the coincidence, the way the story ties together.
Like those moments, they don't feel like they're ridiculously contrived, and they're trying to just serve as a way, as an outlet for a message.
See, but that specific one, though, I buy that because, like, just kind of thinking of it logically, he's a cop on a beat, right? So
sure.
we know that she, like, between her home and the studio where Terrence Howard works, like, we know that is in his division of the city. So the fact that he runs into her once when they're going from A to B, and that he runs into her again when he happens upon the situation, I do actually buy that. It's hard to kind of explain why. It's the same way that I see the same 20 people on the streetcar in the morning because we all happen to be on that corner at 20 after 8. If I'm there at 8:30 or if I'm there at 10 past, I never see these people. But because I'm always there at that time, and so are they, it's just the circle and the schedule that you run. So I do buy that little one. I buy that. I buy that the coincidental of he's in that part of the city because it's his neighborhood. It's not, if he was completely on the other ass end of town, I might not buy it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd also just I agree with that, and also it's a movie. Like,
Well, there's that. Yeah.
I mean, you could say that coincidental thing about almost any film, really.
Well, and clearly
like
all the
Magnolia
coincidences,
happens all
because
that
I mean,
happens.
it's the design of the movie. So, like, if you said we're gonna take all the coincidences out of this movie, you don't have a movie. Like you can argue whether it's a good movie or not, but if you unravel the every character seems to have like two encounter. Almost every one of the major things, it's a paired encounter. You have one encounter, and then you have the second encounter. And if you took the second encounter out, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it would be subtle, better storytelling, but it wouldn't. It would be maybe too loose for a 90 or 100-minute movie. If it was long form TV, you could do it that way, but not in a single feature.
Yeah, I guess just my issue is that it felt like every coincidence or every encounter later in the movie came with like kind of Haggis's agenda, or just at least to have this irony attached to it. Whereas, I mean, I'm not saying that the film has to be realistic or like I brought up the fact that I want things to play out organically. That's not the case with every movie because I like melodrama. I like Magnolia, but just everything just never felt like it was there for the characters, or it was just there to tell to relay some sort of issue. I don't know.
So has anyone here seen Nothing Is Private or Towelhead?
No.
No one has seen it. Like, because as you can say that Haggis is clearly taking his thing and saying, yeah, I like what Robert Altman and P.T. Anderson were doing. I want to make my movie. You have to watch. It's Alan Ball, so it's another TV guy moving into his directorial debut. And you really have to see that movie because it makes Crash look positively restrained. Yeah, like, I mean, it has, like, people running over cats and pregnant women falling on their stomachs, and it's like, as much as you want to, like, be angry at a movie like Crash, it ain't even near the fucking bottom of bad storytelling. You know what I mean? So I might, like, to get back to the star rating that sort of set us down all these roads, I mean, for me, it's like a, 1.5 out of 5. Like, it's not irredeemably. Technically, it's a pretty, for a directorial debut. I don't know who he had doing the cinematography or whatever, but it's a fairly nice looking movie, and it certainly is able to tell its story, and not feel like static or it's just. The craft side of the movie, the technical polish is pretty high, and I kind of, at least that was something. Like when Terrence Howard comes across the car fire of Ryan Philippe's car, like that scene is like visually beautiful.
The
snow,
the scene where he pulls Thandie Newton from the car, actually, that's really, really well shot.
Arguably the film's only real action sequence. And that action, it's staged exceptionally well.
Yeah, he got the guy who shot it is he's Jim Cameron's guy, a guy named J. Michael Murrow. So he shot Titanic, he shot The Abyss, he shot Terminator 2, Miami Vice, which I know you like, Kurt, and so do I. I shouldn't say you like. He shot
has high grain, like Miami Vice. I mean Miami Vice Digital, but but this I don't know. Maybe I don't think Crash is digital, but it definitely has a high grain.
Yeah, he worked on Heat, L.A. Confidential. He's shot.
He likes L.A. He shot the shit out of L.A.
Yeah, the Insider. He's shot a lot of really, really handsome movies.
Well, credit to him, because I mean, one thing I'll say about Crash is that for the most part, it almost always looks good.
Yeah,
I'll give it that. I mean, the characters, like I said, they're sort of portrayed as either victimized angels or bigoted demons, and then they can become redeemable. And I don't know, like like I said, I just feel even when the snow starts falling, I'd rather just take the frogs.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll even go with you on that one. I like Magnolia
like even
a lot better, but
even the song that's playing as the snow is falling, it's very Amy
it's
Man.
very Amy Man,
No.
totally.
So-
and
Well,
putting
I do have to ask one last question before we wrap this up, and this question is actually for Andrew. Did this conversation go the way you thought it was going to go?
No, you guys are really not quite as harsh on it as I thought you were going to be. Even though we're looking at 1.5 stars. I don't know. I'm surprised that.
But to tie it all back to the beginning is this movie would have been more or less ignored. It would be like, Fight Club meets Bottle Shock. Like, it was just kind of whatever, ignored movie. Like, because by most people, had it not been legitimized, whatever that word means when you're talking about Academy Awards, that someone said it earlier. That's what set everyone onto this movie. It would have been a movie that, whatever, people were either dismissive of it or, no one would ever talk about it again if it didn't win awards. People would have watched it. They would have felt better because, oh my God, it shows me that people are complex. Everyone has two sides. Like, for someone that doesn't want to think too hard about a movie, they felt like they saw something deep. They felt like they're a better person. Like someone else said that particular phrase earlier, and then they would move on and actually forget about the movie, and it would, because the movie's ultimately for me is pretty forgettable after it. Now that I look at a movie like Babel, which actually was weird because it kind of got the same sort of anger for it being nominated for an Academy Award, and it seems there's a lot of people that do not like Babel and the way it's told, and I think that movie's friggin' amazing. I really, really love that movie. And I still think that movie's interesting to me to watch, and people can watch it now, and it's still worthy of conversation, whereas Crash, outside of the Academy Award, people would have just, they would have looked at the car wreck and then drove on and went about their day.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, putting the actual characters aside, it's not really a bad performance in the whole thing. I mean, it's full of it's chock full of amazing performances. I mean, okay, Brandon Fraser, he kind of, I mean, he's kind of a Nick Cage type of actor, I think. You like him for his sort of goofiness, maybe, or maybe you hate him for it. But outside of him, I mean, I don't really see any arguments for any bad performances in the entire film, even from small side characters.
They treat that screenplay and give it way more than it deserves. Like, if everyone just did it for a paycheck, if this was a $140 million movie and everyone was just on board for the paycheck, this movie would be 100 times worse. It was the fact that, for whatever reason, all these actors were passionate to work on this movie for no money that makes it a little bit better than it may have been.
All right.
Well, it still gets a 1.5 from me.
Ouch.
I give this one I would give it out of 5. I'd give it 2.5, which is my way of saying I didn't completely dig it, but I can see how other people would.
Yeah.
4.5.
Wow.
High praise.
All right. Yeah, exactly. It's in. I love it. All right.
We'll some agreeing when we talk Soderbergh, I'm sure.
Oh yes, I'm looking forward to that on Sunday. Shameless plug. Check out the Directors Club podcast. Well, that's when we're recording. For this particular show, the Movie Club, next episode, whenever that may be, probably early January after Christmas has died down and whatnot. I believe that what we've decided on tackling is Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas, from 1984. Which I've never seen, and this is going to be fun. Along the same lines, I think, as Lady in the Water was fun. Richard Kelly's Southland Tales from a few years ago. I'm
excited for that one.
Me too. I'm looking forward to revisiting it. So,
I'm looking forward to see if there's any possible, because it's been so many years since I've seen Paris, Texas. I might as well have not seen it. I'm just looking forward to see if there's any possible connection between these movies, because I don't know. You never know. You pair movies up and you see things, but
It happens, doesn't it? Almost no matter what you pick,
it happens
there's some
no
kind
matter
of...
what. This to me is like a gauntlet throwing challenge. I dare you to find similarities between these two.
So I guess that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for everybody who's downloaded the show, and at movieclubpodcast.com, it's a blogger site. You can definitely leave your thoughts in the comments section on what you think of the films we've discussed. And I guess we'll just go around the room one more time. I'm Andrew James from row3.com.
I am Jim Laskowski from directorsclubpodcast.com.
I'm Kurt from Row 3 as well, and Twitch Film.
And I'm Ryan from the matinee.ca and the Matinee Cast.
And so for all those cats, this has been episode number 23 of the Movie Club Podcast. We'll catch you next time down the road.
Cheers.
Bye.